When you feel like quitting, disappear instead. The impulse to give up, to surrender publicly, to announce defeat, is both ancient and destructive. It emerges from exhaustion, overwhelm, and the mistaken belief that visible capitulation will somehow provide relief from the pressures that have brought you to this breaking point. But there exists a more sophisticated response to the crushing weight of impossible circumstances: the art of strategic disappearance. This is not quitting disguised as something else. It is the conscious choice to withdraw from visibility while maintaining your essential commitment to eventual victory. It is the difference between surrender and tactical retreat, between abandonment and strategic regrouping. I have practiced this art in moments when the burden of responsibility threatened to shatter my resolve, when the complexity of challenges exceeded my immediate capacity to solve them, when the cost of continued visibility would have meant certain defeat. In those moments, I learned that the wise warrior knows when to vanish from the battlefield while never abandoning the war itself. Today, I speak of this profound distinction between quitting, the permanent abandonment of your objectives, and disappearing, the temporary withdrawal that preserves your strength for eventual triumph. This is the path of those who understand that some victories can only be achieved by those who first master the courage to become invisible. The moment when you feel like quitting represents a critical threshold, where your psychological resources have been stretched beyond their current capacity to maintain effective action. This breaking point is not a moral failure but a natural consequence of operating at the limits of your strength, endurance, or understanding for extended periods without adequate recovery or resource replenishment. The traditional response to this breaking point, either pushing through despite depletion or publicly quitting, creates false binary thinking that ignores more sophisticated options. Pushing through when genuinely depleted often leads to poor decisions, decreased performance, and eventual breakdown that could have been prevented. Public quitting provides immediate psychological relief, but at the cost of burning bridges, damaging reputation, and foreclosing future opportunities that patience might have preserved. Disappearance offers a third path that honors both your current limitations and your long-term objectives. When you disappear rather than quit, you acknowledge that your current approach or capacity is insufficient while maintaining your essential commitment to eventually achieving what you set out to accomplish. This creates space for recovery, reflection, and strategic recalibration without the finality that quitting demands. The psychological benefits of this approach are substantial. Instead of carrying the burden of being a quitter with all the shame and self-judgment that identity brings, you become someone who was wise enough to recognize when withdrawal was necessary, and disciplined enough to use that withdrawal productively, rather than merely hiding from challenges. Disappearance also protects you from the pressure to justify your decision to others who may not understand the full complexity of your situation. When you quit publicly, you invite commentary, judgment, and well-meaning advice from people who lack the context to appreciate why continuation had become impossible. When you disappear, you preserve your autonomy over the narrative while maintaining the option to return when conditions become more favorable. This strategic approach requires developing tolerance for ambiguity and delayed resolution, unlike quitting, which provides immediate clarity about your status. Disappearance maintains intentional uncertainty about your ultimate intentions. This uncertainty can be psychologically challenging, but strategically valuable, as it prevents others from writing you off completely, while preserving multiple future options. Throughout history, the greatest military strategists and philosophical traditions have recognized that retreat is not the opposite of victory, but often its prerequisite. Strategic withdrawal allows forces to regroup, reassess terrain, gather intelligence, and return at more advantageous moments with superior positioning and renewed strength. Sun Tzu understood that he who knows when to fight and when not to fight will be victorious. This knowledge includes recognizing when continuation of current tactics will lead to certain defeat, and when temporary withdrawal will preserve resources for future engagement under better conditions. The master strategist disappears not from cowardice, but from wisdom about timing and advantage. Ancient Taoist philosophy embraces the principle of strategic yielding as fundamental to long-term success. The Tao Te Ching teaches that water, the softest substance, eventually overcomes the hardest rock through persistence and strategic flow around obstacles rather than direct confrontation. When water encounters insurmountable barriers, it doesn't quit flowing, it finds another route, or waits for conditions that allow breakthrough. In martial arts traditions, the concept of tactical disengagement allows fighters to create distance when overwhelmed, reassess their opponent's patterns, and re-engage from positions of greater advantage. The skilled fighter who steps back when pressured is not retreating in defeat, but creating the space necessary for effective counterattack. Religious and spiritual traditions worldwide recognize the value of withdrawal for renewal and revelation. Desert Fathers retreated to solitude not to escape their spiritual calling, but to deepen their connection to divine guidance through silence and contemplation. Their disappearance from worldly activities enabled deeper engagement with ultimate reality that informed more effective later service. Even in modern business and professional contexts, strategic pivoting, essentially a form of organizational disappearance from unsuccessful approaches, is recognized as essential for long-term success. Companies that rigidly continue failing strategies until they collapse are contrasted with those wise enough to withdraw from unsuccessful directions and emerge with new approaches. The key insight across all these contexts is that strategic withdrawal requires maintaining your essential purpose while changing your methods, timing, or positioning. You disappear from current tactics while preserving commitment to ultimate objectives, creating space for evolution rather than abandonment. When you choose to disappear rather than quit, you create what might be called sanctuary space, protected psychological and sometimes physical territory, where healing, reflection, and strategic planning can occur without the pressures and expectations that created your original overwhelm. This sanctuary serves multiple crucial functions that are impossible to access while remaining visible and engaged. The first function is psychological restoration. Continuous visibility during struggle requires enormous energy to manage others' perceptions, respond to their concerns, and maintain appropriate facades of competence or progress. When you disappear, this energy becomes available for actual problem-solving, creative thinking, and emotional processing. The relief of not having to explain, justify, or perform can be profound enough to shift your entire relationship to the challenges you were facing. The second function is perspective recalibration. When you're deeply embedded in struggling with particular challenges, your vision often narrows to immediate problems and short-term tactics. Disappearance creates distance that allows broader perspective, recognition of patterns that weren't visible up close, and consideration of approaches that the pressure of immediate visibility made difficult to contemplate. Solutions often emerge in solitude that were impossible to see in the midst of active engagement. The third function is strategic intelligence gathering. While disappeared, you can observe without being observed. Notice how situations develop without your direct involvement, and gather information about other players' true motivations and capabilities. This intelligence often proves invaluable when you eventually re-emerge, as you return with understanding that active participants couldn't develop. The fourth function is identity protection. When you're struggling visibly, there's risk that others will begin to identify you with your current difficulties rather than your essential capabilities. Disappearance prevents this association from solidifying, preserving others' perception of your competence while you work through temporary challenges. This protection becomes particularly important in professional or social contexts where reputation affects future opportunities. The sanctuary of invisibility also provides space for what might be called identity composting, allowing aspects of yourself that weren't working to decompose naturally while nurturing new growth. Just as forest floors transform fallen leaves into fertile soil, disappearance allows failed approaches, exhausted patterns, and limiting beliefs to break down into raw material for renewed strength and wisdom. Perhaps most importantly, sanctuary space allows you to reconnect with your authentic motivations versus the expectations, pressures, and obligations that may have contributed to your original overwhelm. In silence and solitude, you can distinguish between what you genuinely want to accomplish and what others need you to accomplish, often discovering that much of your struggle emerged from trying to serve too many masters simultaneously. The art of disappearing rather than quitting requires developing a sophisticated form of patience that remains actively engaged with eventual success while accepting the necessity of current withdrawal. This is not passive waiting but active preparation, using the time of invisibility to develop capacities, gather resources, and create conditions that will enable more effective future engagement. This discipline begins with clear distinction between temporary tactics and permanent purpose. When you disappear, you withdraw from specific approaches, timing, or positioning, while maintaining absolute commitment to your fundamental objectives. This requires holding apparent contradictions, being absent while remaining engaged, being invisible while staying focused, being withdrawn while preparing for eventual return. The patience required is particularly challenging because it often means allowing others to misinterpret your disappearance as abandonment, weakness, or failure. Friends may assume you've given up. Competitors may celebrate your apparent defeat. Observers may write you off as someone who couldn't handle the pressure. Maintaining commitment to your ultimate objectives while allowing these misperceptions requires extraordinary internal fortitude. Strategic patience also demands resisting the urge to defend your choice or explain your absence to those who demand justification. The power of disappearance lies partly in its mystery. When you start explaining your strategic withdrawal, you often undermine its effectiveness by reducing uncertainty that was serving your interests. Learning to remain silent while others speculate becomes essential for preserving the advantages that disappearance creates. This discipline extends to managing your own psychological needs for validation and recognition. While disappeared, you receive no external acknowledgement for your continued effort, no encouragement for your persistence, no recognition for the progress you may be making in invisible ways. The discipline requires developing internal sources of validation that can sustain motivation without external feedback. Perhaps most challenging is maintaining strategic patience when opportunities arise that tempt premature emergence. There may be moments when you could return to visibility and achieve partial success, but strategic patience requires waiting for conditions that enable optimal, rather than merely acceptable outcomes. This often means continuing to disappear, even when continuation requires significant sacrifice of immediate gratification. The discipline also involves active use of disappearance time, rather than passive hiding. Strategic patience includes developing new skills, gathering intelligence, building resources, or creating conditions that will support more effective future engagement. The disappeared person who emerges unchanged has wasted the opportunity that withdrawal provided. The ultimate test of strategic disappearance lies not in the withdrawal itself, but in the wisdom and timing of your return. Re-emergence must be as carefully planned and executed as the original disappearance, as poor timing or inadequate preparation can waste all the advantages that your absence created. The first principle of strategic re-emergence is returning only when you possess genuine advantage rather than merely feeling ready to try again. This advantage might take many forms: new capabilities you've developed during absence, changed circumstances that favor your approach, resources you've gathered while invisible, or intelligence you've acquired about other players' weaknesses. Without some form of genuine advantage, re-emergence becomes repetition rather than evolution. The second principle involves calibrating your return to maximum impact rather than immediate relief. After a period of invisibility, your return will generate attention and curiosity that can be leveraged strategically. This attention is finite and should be used purposefully rather than squandered on premature or inadequately prepared re-engagement. The most powerful returns often seem effortless precisely because so much preparation occurred during the invisible period. Timing becomes crucial for effective re-emergence. Markets change, people's attention shifts, competitive landscapes evolve, and opportunities emerge that didn't exist when you originally withdrew. Strategic re-emergence requires reading these changes accurately and positioning your return to align with favorable conditions rather than merely personal readiness. The art also involves managing others' expectations and perceptions about your return. Those who assumed you had quit may be surprised by your reappearance, while those who hoped for your failure may be disappointed by your evident strength. Using these reactions strategically, neither explaining too much nor revealing all your preparations, maintains the mystique that can serve your renewed efforts. Re-emergence often requires accepting that some relationships, opportunities, or positions may no longer be available due to your absence. Strategic re-emergence means focusing on what has become possible, rather than mourning what was lost. recognizing that disappearance often closes certain doors while opening others that wouldn't have been accessible through continuous visibility. Perhaps most importantly, effective re-emergence demonstrates that your disappearance was strategic rather than reactive. When you return stronger, more capable, and better positioned than when you left, you retrospectively justify your withdrawal and establish a reputation for wisdom under pressure that serves future challenges. The path I walked taught me that the moments when you feel most like quitting are often the moments when disappearance becomes most strategic. These breaking points, rather than representing failure, become opportunities to practice one of the most sophisticated forms of strength, the power to vanish purposefully, while maintaining your essential commitment to eventual triumph. I learned that those who master the art of strategic disappearance develop a form of resilience unavailable to those who only know how to push forward or give up. They create options where others see only dead ends, maintain agency where others feel trapped, and preserve energy where others exhaust themselves in futile continuation or premature surrender. Your modern world has made disappearance more difficult and more necessary simultaneously. Social media creates pressure for constant visibility and immediate response to every challenge. Professional cultures often interpret any form of withdrawal as weakness or abandonment. Personal relationships may demand continuous availability and explanation for every choice. Yet the same technologies and systems that make disappearance difficult also make it more powerful when skillfully employed. In a world of constant noise, strategic silence commands attention. In an environment of immediate reactions, considered response carries weight. In a culture of compulsive sharing, mystery becomes magnetic. The discipline of disappearing rather than quitting requires developing comfort with being misunderstood, patience with delayed gratification, and faith in your ability to use invisible time productively. It demands accepting that some people will write you off, some opportunities will pass, and some forms of recognition will be sacrificed for the sake of long-term strategic positioning. But the rewards of mastering this art extend far beyond any particular situation where you choose to disappear. You develop psychological resilience that doesn't depend on continuous external validation. You cultivate strategic thinking that considers multiple time horizons and possibility scenarios. You build a reputation for depth and wisdom that shallow persistence cannot achieve. Remember that every person you admire for their accomplishments has faced moments when continuation seemed impossible and quitting appeared rational. What distinguished them was not the absence of these moments, but their response to them. The greatest achievements often emerge from those who had the wisdom to disappear when visibility would have meant defeat, and the patience to remain committed to their objectives despite temporary withdrawal from active pursuit. When you next feel the urge to quit, pause and consider the alternative of disappearance. Ask yourself whether your current approach, timing, or positioning might be the problem rather than your underlying objectives. Consider whether strategic withdrawal might preserve options that quitting would eliminate, create opportunities that persistence would prevent, or allow development that continued struggle would make impossible. The art of strategic disappearance is ultimately the art of playing the long game with wisdom, patience, and strategic sophistication. It recognizes that some victories require temporary invisibility, some successes demand patient preparation, and some triumphs can only be achieved by those brave enough to vanish when vanishing serves their ultimate purpose. When you feel like quitting, disappear instead. Use your invisibility to heal what was wounded, develop what was lacking, and prepare what was insufficient. Return when you can win, rather than merely when you can no longer stand to be absent. In mastering this art, you join the ranks of those who understand that true strength sometimes requires the courage to become temporarily invisible, while never abandoning your commitment to eventual victory. Your disappearance is not retreat, it is reconnaissance. Your absence is not abandonment, it is preparation. Your silence is not surrender, it is the gathering of strength for battles yet to be fought and won. Master this art, and you will discover that the power to disappear strategically becomes one of your most valuable resources for navigating a world that often demands more than can be given while still expecting ultimate success from those wise enough to choose their battles and their timing with strategic precision.